The ballroom went silent the moment the janitor dropped the coffee tray. Hot black coffee splashed across the polished marble floor, right onto the Italian shoes of the company's CEO. Gasps spread across the room. A few people laughed. Someone whispered, "Of course it was the cleaner." The old man immediately bent down to clean the mess with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry." But then the CEO's son grabbed the old janitor by the collar and slapped him across the face. Hard. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody defended him, because to everyone inside that billion-dollar skyscraper, he was just a night janitor. A quiet old man with gray hair, cheap clothes, and a mop. What they didn't know was that 17 years earlier, that same man had walked through gunfire in Fallujah carrying 2 wounded soldiers on his back. And before this night was over, the spoiled millionaire who hit him would beg that janitor to save his life. Slow cinematic pause. Rain hammered the glass walls of Blackstone Dynamics Tower. 47 floors above downtown Chicago, the executive celebration was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers glowed gold. Champagne flowed like water. A jazz band played softly near the balcony. The company had just secured a defense contract worth $900 million. Everyone important was there. Politicians, investors, military contractors, news reporters. And standing completely unnoticed beside the service hallway was Arthur Hayes, 70 years old, night janitor, widower, invisible. He pushed his cleaning cart quietly across the marble floor while rich executives stepped around him without looking. Like furniture. Like he wasn't human. Arthur was used to that. Invisible people learned to survive by staying quiet. Especially men like him. Men who had already seen too much. A young waitress nearly bumped into him carrying champagne glasses. "Sorry," she whispered nervously. Arthur gave a small smile. "You're okay, kid." His voice was calm, deep, steady in a way that made people feel strangely safe. The girl smiled back for a second, until a loud voice shattered the moment. "Can somebody move this janitor out of the damn way?" Laughter erupted nearby. Arthur looked up. Ethan Blackwell, 32 years old, son of CEO Richard Blackwell. Perfect suit, perfect haircut, perfect fake smile. The kind of man born rich enough to confuse arrogance with intelligence. He stood near the bar surrounded by investors and models. A whiskey glass in one hand, disrespect in the other. Arthur lowered his eyes. "Sorry, sir." Ethan smirked. "That mop probably costs more than your apartment." More laughter. Arthur simply continued cleaning. No reaction. No anger. Nothing. And somehow, that bothered Ethan even more. Because bullies hate people who refuse to break. Cinematic transition. 3 floors below the party. Inside the underground parking garage, a black SUV rolled slowly into a restricted section. 4 men stepped out. Heavy boots, dark jackets, military posture. Not guests. One of them opened a duffel bag. Inside, weapons. Another man unfolded blueprints of the tower. "The target enters the security vault at 10:40, he muttered. "No mistakes." The tallest man nodded. "What about civilians?" The leader's expression stayed cold. "Doesn't matter. Back upstairs." Nobody had any idea death was already inside the building. Arthur pushed his cleaning cart toward the executive hallway. But then he stopped. Very slightly. Barely noticeable. His eyes shifted toward the elevator. Listening. Not looking. Listening. A tiny sound. Metal clicking together. Magazine loading. His face changed. Only for half a second. The old janitor slowly straightened his back. And for the first time all night, he didn't look old anymore. Slow pause. 20 years of military instinct never really disappear. Arthur quietly walked toward the security office. Inside sat Carl Benson, overweight night guard, watching basketball highlights on his phone. "Evening, Arthur," Carl said lazily. Arthur's voice lowered. "You got extra cameras in the underground garage." Carl frowned. What? Arthur stepped closer. There are armed men downstairs. Carl blinked, then laughed. You serious? Arthur didn't smile. Carl's grin slowly faded, but before he could respond, his radio crackled violently. Static, then screaming. Gunshots exploded through the speaker. Carl jumped upright. What the hell? The power suddenly cut. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Women screamed upstairs. Emergency red lights flickered on. Arthur closed his eyes briefly. Calculating. Listening. Gunfire echoed from 3 floors below. Fast. Professional. Not random shooters. Trained. Carl grabbed his pistol with trembling hands. Oh God. Arthur looked at him calmly. How many exits lock remotely? Carl swallowed hard. All of them, from the security hub downstairs. Arthur nodded once. Then he did something strange. He removed his janitor gloves carefully. Like a man preparing for work. Not panic. Not fear. Preparation. Carl stared at him. Arthur's voice became colder. Listen carefully. If those men take the security floor, everyone upstairs becomes trapped. How do you know that? Arthur looked toward the dark hallway. Because that's exactly what I would do. Carl froze. Another burst of gunfire thundered downstairs. Closer now. People upstairs started running. The celebration turned into chaos. Investors shoved each other toward exits. Champagne glasses shattered. The jazz band stopped mid-song. Ethan Blackwell stormed toward security furious. What is happening? Carl stuttered. Armed men in the building. Panic spread instantly. One woman started crying. Another executive yelled for police. But Arthur noticed something nobody else did. The attackers weren't rushing upward. They were moving strategically, toward one specific place. The defense contract vault. This wasn't terrorism. It was extraction. Professional. Targeted. Dangerous. Arthur turned toward Carl. How many gunmen? Maybe 6, maybe more. Arthur nodded slowly. Then he reached beneath his janitor cart. Carl frowned. What are you doing? Arthur pulled out a long black case hidden beneath cleaning supplies. Ethan scoffed. What? The janitor keeps tools now. Arthur opened the case. Inside, perfectly maintained combat knives. Military grade. The room went silent. Carl stared. Ethan laughed nervously. What the hell is this? Arthur ignored him. His movements became smooth, efficient, like muscle memory waking up after years of sleep. He strapped the knife beneath his sleeve, checked the balance automatically, then looked at Carl. You have access to building blueprints. Carl nodded slowly. Arthur pointed at the screen. Show me service tunnels. Ethan stepped forward angrily. Who the hell do you think you are? Arthur finally looked directly into his eyes. And Ethan unconsciously stepped back. Because the old janitor's eyes no longer looked tired. They looked lethal. I'm the reason men like them used to fail. Silence. Then, boom. An explosion rocked the lower floors. Screams echoed upward. The building shook violently. Sprinklers activated overhead. Water poured through the ballroom. Arthur grabbed the security radio. His voice turned sharp, controlled, commanding. All civilians stay away from elevators. Lock conference rooms. Barricade upper floors. Move now. People obeyed instantly. Not because they knew him. Because his voice sounded like survival. Ethan stared in confusion. Who was this man? And why did everyone suddenly trust him more than security? Arthur turned to Carl. Police response time. 10, maybe 15 minutes. Arthur nodded. Too long. Way too long. The attackers would finish before then. Unless someone stopped them. Arthur looked toward the dark stairwell descending into the building. Memories flashed behind his eyes. Sandstorms. Helicopters. Blood. Radio static. Dead soldiers. Promises made to men who never came home. He had buried that version of himself years ago. Locked it away beside his grief. Beside his wife's funeral. Beside the folded American flag in his closet. But tonight, violence had followed him home again. Ethan scoffed nervously. You seriously think you can stop armed mercenaries with a mop? Arthur looked at him quietly. Then, from somewhere deep below, came another scream. A terrified female scream cut short by gunfire. Arthur's jaw tightened. Decision made. He picked up the radio. "What's your name?" Carl asked weakly. Arthur paused. Long silence. Then quietly, "Commander Arthur Hayes." Carl's eyes widened. Former Navy SEAL Commander Arthur Hayes. The name hit like lightning. Even Ethan recognized it, because years ago, every news channel in America had called Arthur Hayes the Ghost of Fallujah. The soldier who rescued 13 Marines during an ambush after being shot twice. The man decorated by presidents. The warrior who disappeared after his wife died. Ethan whispered, "No, that's impossible." Arthur ignored him. He moved toward the stairwell. Slow, calm, like a wolf returning to the forest. Carl called after him, "What's the plan?" Arthur stopped without turning around. "Keep them alive until I finish the job." Then the old janitor disappeared into the darkness below. Cinematic pause. The stairwell smelled like smoke and concrete dust. Arthur moved silently downward. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Every step controlled. Below him, voices echoed. Foreign accents. Professional radio chatter. He crouched near the lower landing and peeked through the railing. 3 armed men guarded the hallway. Body armor. Automatic rifles. Military formation. Not amateurs. Arthur studied them for exactly 3 seconds. Then moved. Fast. Faster than a 70-year-old man had any right to move. One hand grabbed the first mercenary's mouth. Combat knife straight into the throat. Second attacker turned. Too slow. Arthur slammed his head into the concrete wall and disarmed him instantly. Gunfire erupted. Suppressed shots. Arthur rolled behind cover as bullets tore through drywall. The third mercenary shouted into his radio. "Contact! Contact!" Arthur threw the combat knife. Direct hit. Silence returned. 3 men down. 22 seconds. Arthur picked up an assault rifle calmly. Checked ammo. Military habit. Then kept moving. Upstairs. People huddled inside conference rooms. Terrified. Phones shaking in their hands. Ethan paced angrily near the executive lounge. "This is insane. Where's SWAT?" Nobody answered. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. The only thing standing between them and the killers downstairs was the janitor they mocked an hour ago. And that realization felt ugly. Very ugly. A young employee looked toward the stairwell nervously. "Do you think he's alive?" Before anyone could answer, the radio crackled. Arthur's voice. Cold. Focused. "I confirmed 7 hostiles. Possibly more. They have military training." The room froze. "How is he still alive?" Someone whispered. Arthur continued. "They're heading toward the vault server room on level 12. Lock every electronic access point now." Carl grabbed the radio. "They already hacked security controls." Arthur replied instantly. "Then we do it manually." Another pause. Then, "Ethan Blackwell, you still upstairs?" Ethan grabbed the radio awkwardly. "Yeah." Arthur's voice hardened. "Listen carefully. Your father is their real target." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What? This attack isn't about money. Someone inside your company hired them." Silence crashed into the room. Arthur continued. "And whoever did it, wants your father dead before midnight." Ethan looked toward the ballroom where his father hid with investors. Suddenly the celebration didn't feel glamorous anymore. It felt like a trap. Cinematic transition. Meanwhile, on level 12, CEO Richard Blackwell sat trembling behind a locked conference room. 3 executives beside him, sweating, panicking. Richard whispered, "How are they inside the building?" Nobody answered. Then one executive slowly looked away. Too quickly. Arthur would have noticed. Richard didn't. Yet, downstairs, Arthur moved through dark maintenance corridors. Emergency lights flickered red across his face. Gunfire echoed somewhere ahead. Then, a small sound behind him. Arthur spun instantly. A young female employee stood there shaking. Maybe 23 years old. Tears streaming down her face. They killed security downstairs. Arthur lowered his weapon slightly. You injured? She shook her head. My friend is trapped near accounting. Arthur studied her for 1 second. Fear genuine, not bait. What's your name? Lena. Arthur nodded once. Stay behind me. She hesitated. You're really Navy SEAL Arthur Hayes, aren't you? Arthur kept walking. That man died a long time ago. But Lena noticed something. Every frightened person they passed calmed down when Arthur appeared. Not because he promised safety. Because he looked like safety. And in moments of terror, people follow certainty more than hope. They reached accounting level. Bodies lay near the hallway. Security guards. Dead. Lena covered her mouth. Arthur's face remained unreadable. Professional soldiers learn long ago. Grief comes later. If you survive. A sudden noise echoed from the office ahead. Whimpering. Arthur signaled Lena to stay back. Then entered silently. Inside, 2 employees hid beneath desks. Terrified. One man bleeding from the shoulder. Arthur immediately assessed the wound. Not fatal. The injured employee looked up weakly. Oh my God, you're the janitor. Arthur ripped cloth for a bandage. Pressure on the wound. The man stared. You were military. Arthur tied the bandage tightly. Still breathing. That's what matters. Suddenly, radio chatter burst nearby. Mercenaries approaching. Arthur looked at Lena. Take them to the ventilation stairwell. Stay low. What about you? Arthur picked up the fallen guard's rifle. I'm going hunting. The fear in her eyes changed into awe. Because for the first time all night, someone was fighting back, and he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a janitor uniform stained with bleach. Slow cinematic pause. On level 15, the mercenary leader watched security cameras calmly. Mid-40s. Scar across his jaw. Former Special Forces. Name: Victor Saran. A man who sold wars for money. One of his men approached nervously. We lost contact with Team 2. Victor's expression darkened. How? No idea. Then another mercenary spoke into his headset. There's someone moving through maintenance corridors. Security. The man swallowed. No, an old guy. Victor frowned. An old guy killed 3 trained operators. Silence. Then, he moves like military. Victor slowly smiled. Finally, a challenge. Back upstairs. Ethan sat beside his father now. The spoiled arrogance slowly fading from his face. Richard whispered, you said you recognized that janitor's name. Ethan nodded slowly. Arthur Hayes. Richard frowned. The SEAL commander. Yeah. Richard looked stunned. That's impossible. But deep down, he remembered something. Years ago, during a veterans charity event, Arthur Hayes had briefly appeared in the news beside senators and generals. Then vanished completely after his wife died from cancer. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody cared long enough to ask. Until tonight. A loud metallic bang shook the conference room door. Everyone screamed. Voices outside. Armed men. Richard's breathing accelerated. Ethan grabbed a decorative fire poker uselessly. Another slam hit the door. Harder. The hinges cracked. One executive started crying. Then, gunshots erupted outside. Fast. Violent. Silence followed. The room froze. Slowly, the damaged door creaked open. Arthur stood there breathing hard. Blood on his sleeve, not all of it his. He looked at Richard calmly. We need to move. Now. Richard stared speechlessly. Arthur turned toward Ethan. You know service routes to the rooftop. Ethan nodded shakily. Arthur handed him a pistol. Then congratulations. Ethan blinked. You're useful now. Arthur moved everyone quickly through executive corridors. No panic. No wasted movement. Only purpose. But halfway down the hallway, Arthur suddenly stopped. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. His eyes narrowed. Then he shoved everyone sideways. Right as bullets exploded through the glass wall ahead. Sniper fire. People screamed. Arthur returned fire instantly. Controlled bursts. Professional. The sniper ducked back. Arthur grabbed Ethan by the collar. Move. They sprinted through smoke and shattered glass. Richard stumbled. Arthur caught him before he fell. Despite being 70 years old, he carried the CEO like dead weight through gunfire. Because heroes don't stop being heroes when they grow old. They just get tired. Very tired. They reached a locked maintenance hallway. Arthur slammed the door shut behind them. Heavy breathing filled the corridor. Ethan stared at him. You got shot. Arthur glanced at blood soaking his arm. Not deep. Ethan looked horrified. Arthur barely cared. Then suddenly, Richard Blackwell spoke quietly. Why are you doing this? Arthur paused. Long silence. Then, because innocent people are trapped. That's it. Arthur looked away briefly. My son worked in Tower 2 on 9/11. The hallway fell silent. He called me while the building burned. Arthur's voice stayed calm. Too calm. The line disconnected before I could say goodbye. Even Ethan stopped breathing. Arthur continued softly. After that, I made myself a promise. Another pause. If people are in danger, I show up. No dramatic speech. No hero pose. Just truth. And somehow, that hit harder than anything else. Cinematic transition. Meanwhile, Victor studied security footage carefully. Watching Arthur move through the building. Precise. Efficient. Relentless. Then Victor finally recognized him. His eyes widened slightly. Arthur Hayes. One mercenary frowned. You know him. Victor's smile disappeared. In Afghanistan, entire villages whispered about him. The mercenary laughed nervously. He's an old man. Victor looked directly at him. No. Then quietly. He's a predator. Fear spread through the room. Because professional killers know exactly how dangerous legends can be, especially old ones. Old lions survive for a reason. Back upstairs, Arthur guided the group toward rooftop access. But Ethan kept staring at him differently now. Not like a janitor. Like a man. A real man. The kind Ethan had never learned to become. Arthur suddenly stopped again. Footsteps ahead. Multiple hostiles. Arthur looked around quickly. No escape route. He turned toward the civilians. When I opened that door, run left. Don't stop. Richard grabbed his arm. You can't fight all of them alone. Arthur checked his rifle calmly. Yes, I can. Then he opened the door. Chaos exploded instantly. Gunfire. Smoke. Screaming. Arthur moved like pure instinct. Two mercenaries dropped before they understood what happened. Third attacker charged. Arthur disarmed him barehanded and slammed him into the wall. Ethan watched in disbelief. This wasn't combat. It was survival perfected into art. But then, another gunman appeared behind Arthur. Rifle raised. Ethan's eyes widened. Without thinking, the spoiled billionaire's son jumped forward and fired the pistol Arthur gave him. The mercenary collapsed. Silence. Ethan stood frozen, hands shaking violently. Arthur looked at him for a long moment. Then nodded once. Respect. Real respect. And Ethan almost broke emotionally from receiving it. Because all his life, money bought him approval. But this had to be earned. Sirens finally echoed outside the tower. Police arriving. But Arthur knew something everyone else didn't. Victor wouldn't surrender. Men like him never do. Which meant, the worst part was still coming. Slow cinematic pause. The rooftop door burst open. Cold rain slammed against them instantly. Police helicopters circled the skyline in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed below. For one brief second, it looked like survival. Then a voice echoed behind them. Don't move, Victor. Holding Lena hostage. Gun pressed against her head. Arthur's face hardened instantly. The mercenaries had circled around. Victor smiled coldly. I was wondering when I'd finally meet you. Arthur stepped forward slowly. Let the girl go. Victor laughed. Still the hero. Lena trembled violently. Arthur's eyes never left Victor's weapon. Professional focus. Calculating angles. Wind speed. Distance. Timing. Victor tilted his head. You know what fascinates me about men like you. Arthur stayed silent. You still believe saving people matters. Another pause. But the world forgot you. Rain poured harder. Victor smirked. You mop floors for rich people who laugh at you. Ethan lowered his eyes in shame. Because it was true. Arthur had been invisible, mocked, humiliated, and still, he chose to save them. Arthur finally spoke. Being forgotten doesn't matter. Victor frowned slightly. Arthur's voice stayed calm. Who you are when people need help. That matters. Something shifted in Ethan hearing those words. Something permanent. Victor sighed. Beautiful speech. Then aimed the gun tighter at Lena. Arthur moved instantly. A flashbang grenade flew from his hand. Boom. Blinding light. Chaos erupted. Arthur charged through the explosion. Gunshots cracked wildly. Lena screamed. Ethan tackled one mercenary. Police snipers shouted through loudspeakers. Arthur slammed into Victor near the rooftop edge. Two old warriors crashing through rain and concrete. Victor punched hard. Arthur absorbed it. Countered. Knife flashed. Blood hit the rooftop. Victor snarled. You should have stayed dead, old man. Arthur headbutted him brutally. Years of grief, war, loss, pain, everything exploded into that moment. Victor grabbed Arthur's gun arm. Both men slammed dangerously close to the edge, 50 stories above the city. Rain pouring endlessly. Then Victor saw it. Arthur's eyes. Not anger. Not fear. Duty. Unbreakable duty. And suddenly Victor understood why legends exist. Because some men simply refuse to quit. Ever. Arthur twisted violently. Victor lost balance. And disappeared over the rooftop edge screaming into the storm. Silence. Only rain remained. Arthur dropped to one knee breathing hard. Police flooded the rooftop seconds later. Weapons raised, then lowered. Because standing there beneath flashing helicopter lights, the old janitor didn't look like a suspect. He looked like the end of the nightmare. Cinematic pause. 3 weeks later, Blackstone Dynamics held another gathering. Smaller this time. No champagne towers. No arrogance. Just gratitude. Employees filled the lobby quietly. Reporters crowded outside. Arthur stood near the elevator wearing the same janitor uniform. Same mop cart. Same quiet posture. Because after all the headlines, after all the interviews, after becoming a national hero again, Arthur Hayes returned to work. Like nothing changed. Ethan approached nervously. Different now. Humbler. No designer arrogance left in his eyes. I owe you my life, he said quietly. Arthur kept cleaning. You owe people respect. Ethan swallowed hard. Arthur looked at him finally. Especially the ones society trains you not to see. Ethan nodded slowly. Emotion building in his throat. Arthur handed him the mop. Ethan frowned. What's this for? Arthur smiled faintly. You spilled coffee. For the first time in years. Arthur laughed softly. And Ethan laughed too. Not as a billionaire. Not as a spoiled executive. Just as a human being learning humility. Across the room, employees started clapping. Then louder. More people joined. Soon the entire lobby stood applauding the old janitor. Arthur looked uncomfortable immediately. Heroes rarely enjoy attention. He quietly pushed the mop cart toward the elevator. But before the doors closed, Lena called out, Commander Hayes. Arthur turned. She smiled through tears. You showed up. Arthur nodded once. Simple, quiet, certain, always. The elevator doors closed slowly. And inside that steel box, the old warrior stood alone again. Just a janitor. Just a forgotten man. Just a hero nobody saw coming. But somewhere deep in that giant city, people would remember something after that night. The person carrying the answer, the courage, or the strength to save everyone, is not always the loudest man in the room. Sometimes, he's the one holding the mop. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were standing in that tower that night?